Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Hello, Washington. Hello, New York. It's great to see you. It's especially great to see you not crowding around me at an airport, but sitting down very patiently. I hope I didn't keep you waiting. The last time I was here briefing at the Foreign Press Center, it was in early February, just after I had returned from a very extensive trip through Southeast Asia and elsewhere. And at the time, I remember talking to you about what I called the new normal of our rebalance, a high tempo of sustained and high-level interaction and engagement with all quadrants of the Asia-Pacific region. And I'm proud to say that we have sustained that engagement. We've deepened it. There's an awful lot going on at many levels of the U.S. government in what is a tremendously important year for the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. So I want to begin by inviting you to follow us on Twitter at U.S. Asia Pacific. That's the account that we use to keep everybody up to date on what's going on, what we're working on. And it's also a vehicle, if you want to ask me questions, you are welcome to do that through the U.S. Asia Pacific account. And we're doing everything that we can to make sure you see what I'm up to, what my colleagues are up to, what's going on. So please take advantage of that. If you are following it, then you got a very good look from the inside at the recent very successful and very important visit to Washington by the Japanese Prime Minister Abe, when President Obama hosted him here. We got a lot done in that meeting on the alliance front, particularly the issuance of the revised defense guidelines. We got a lot done on the economic and trade side. We got a lot done in terms of regional and global cooperation. And now we're only about 4 weeks out from the visit of the Korean president, President Park, and that also is going to be an opportunity to strengthen and deepen our alliance and our cooperation across the board. We have a number of senior Chinese officials coming to Washington next month for our annual strategic and economic dialogue and our high-level dialogue on people-to-people exchanges. And there's an ongoing stream of foreign ministers visiting from throughout Asia. In fact, just before I left to join Secretary Kerry in Asia, the Foreign Secretary of the Philippines, Albert de Rosario, was here for very good, very substantive meetings. There are also U.S. cabinet secretaries, senior officials, military officers, and many members of Congress who have been in and are, in fact, at this moment, visiting in Asia. And the day before I left, just last week, I hosted here in Washington the 10 senior officials from ASEAN, the PERMSECs, or the vice foreign ministers from the 10 countries that make up that group, for our U.S.-ASEAN dialogue. This is an ongoing discussion that we hold about key issues in the Asia-Pacific, particularly, of course, in Southeast Asia, about the U.S.-ASEAN relationship, about regional architecture and regional projects, ongoing programs like the Lower Mekong Initiative, and problems that face us all, like problematic behavior in the South China Sea. We also discussed the issue of human trafficking, and particularly the plight of the Rohingya and the Bangladesh migrants who are being trafficked and who are in such dire distress in the Andaman Sea and the Straits of Malacca. From there, I went to Beijing and joined Secretary Kerry for his meetings with top Chinese officials, and we proceeded there from there to Seoul and on to Seattle. I think we got back about 24 hours ago, if my math is right. Let me just run through very briefly. In China, the Secretary met with President Xi Jinping and with other senior policy officials to prepare for the upcoming strategic and economic dialogue, and of course to prepare for the expected state visit of President Xi to the United States in the fall. One of the big issues that came out of the last summit in Beijing in November was an important bilateral agreement on climate change. And the Secretary and President Xi picked up that agenda and discussed how we can advance our cooperation in this important year through the SNED in the run-up to the Paris conference in December. They discussed a range of priority issues, such as our cooperative work to complete an agreement with Iran and the efforts that we're making jointly and in tandem with our other six-party partners to push for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and to deal with North Korea's continued violations and continued defiance. Secretary Kerry was able to deliver a very clear and a very frank expression of our concerns about the situation in the South China Sea. And you'll have seen that last week I testified before the Senate on this important policy issue. And so I think our views are firmly on the record and well known. We take the same approach in private that we do in public to emphasize the importance that we place and that all countries should place on adherence to the rule of law, on the reliance exclusively on peaceful means to settle differences or to manage them, on the importance of preserving freedom of navigation, respecting the rights of neighbors and the tranquility of the environment. And in particular, Secretary Kerry was able to share our serious concerns about the large-scale reclamation work that's underway and the construction of numerous outposts that are seen as not only destabilizing but threatening by many of China's neighbors. He talked about the lack of progress on the diplomatic front, the code of conduct, for example, and reinforced the undesirable effects of unilateral action and the importance of using good diplomacy and exercising restraint in this very sensitive area. The Secretary and I and our team proceeded from Beijing to Seoul, where the Secretary met with President Park. He met also with Foreign Minister Yun and used those meetings to talk about the strength and the health of our alliance, what we've accomplished, which is very considerable. He reviewed progress that we've made both in terms of the alliance, such as headway on the OPCON transition planning and the special measures agreement. He talked about the trade agenda, where we've made significant progress, of course, in implementing the KORUS FTA, and that work continues apace. Pointed out the success in reaching a place where we initialed the 123 Civil Nuclear Agreement. And they discussed in depth our planning for the upcoming visit of President Park. You won't be surprised to hear that North Korea featured very prominently on the agenda. We discussed our combined efforts to deter North Korean aggression, to maintain our high degree of vigilance and our strong defense. They also discussed ways that we can continue to appropriately shine the spotlight of international attention and concern on the dreadful human rights situation in North Korea. And the Secretary and the Foreign Minister and President Park exchanged views on strategy as to how we work to bring North Korea to the point where it realizes that there is no viable alternative to negotiating an end to its nuclear program and coming into compliance with its international obligations under the UN Security Council resolutions. Now, the discussions also included future areas of cooperation, what some have called the new frontier in the U.S.-ROK relationship. These are cutting-edge areas where, in the 21st century, it makes sense for the United States and the Republic of Korea to expand cooperation. One of those areas is in cyberspace. And the Secretary at Korea University gave a very important speech on cyber, on the internet economy, and laying out U.S. policy in a very extensive manner. His basic point, the internet should be open to everybody. We want free speech. We want free access to the digital world as well, for everyone. And he laid out important principles of peacetime behavior aimed at promoting international cyber access and international cyber stability. When we left Seoul, we proceeded to the great city of Seattle, a gateway for the United States to the Pacific, and a city that has a special place in the Trans-Pacific trade that has benefited the people of the United States, the region, and the Pacific Northwest for so long. And while he was there, he visited a Boeing aircraft factory, and with that as the backdrop, gave a speech. I would call it a spirited endorsement of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of the TPP. His logic is laid out very clearly in his remarks. I won't recreate it. But he made it clear that this is the most important step that we can now take in advancing the interests of the United States, of the TPP partners, of the region, and of the global economy. And I know the Senate has acted on Trade Promotion Authority today. That's another step forward. We're glad of that, and we really need to and seek to get the TPP agreement done. Let me also mention that the Deputy Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who has been tremendously active and engaged on the Asia portfolio, is in Southeast Asia right now. He's wrapping up a trip to Vietnam, Indonesia, and Burma. He started in Vietnam, where he met with civil society, with youth leaders, with top officials from the government, from the party, from the National Assembly. And then he visited Ho Chi Minh, arguably the commercial center of Vietnam, where he met with business leaders as well as teachers and young people. There's a very strong partnership building up between Vietnam and the United States under our Comprehensive Partnership Agreement, and in the 20th anniversary of our year of our diplomatic relations. The issues that Tony Blinken and his interlocutors focused on covered a wide span of concerns, but dug deeply into the TPP issues and what needs to happen next, as well as discussing in depth the challenges and the issues of the South China Sea. I think Tony, based on the feedback he provided us, was impressed with the vigor and the vitality, the energy of civil society in Vietnam, and he certainly pressed the human rights agenda in every one of his meetings. He then went to Indonesia, where similarly he met not only with the Indonesian civil society, including religious leaders and academics and government officials, but he also met with the permanent representatives to ASEAN who were headquartered in Jakarta, and had good discussions with them about ASEAN issues. He met with business leaders also to talk about trade and the commercial environment there. And high on his agenda with the Indonesian government officials, of course, was the preparation for the upcoming visit of President Jokowi to the United States. I mentioned his meetings with young people, and I just flagged that he spent some time at this wonderful facility the U.S. Embassy operates called At America with some young leaders, talking about the importance that we place on them, on youth in ASEAN and the President's Young Southeast Asia Leadership Initiative. Just as a teaser, mention that you should stay tuned for an announcement coming out of the White House soon about a YSEALI event. This is a tremendously good and effective program that allows young leaders from all 10 Southeast Asian countries to find common ground, to collaborate on projects, and to do so in partnership with stakeholders in the United States, stakeholder number one being President Obama. The Deputy Secretary went on from there to Burma. In fact, he's there now. In his meetings in Myanmar with the government in Naypyidaw and with Aung San Suu Kyi and other political leaders and civil society leaders in Rangoon. He also expressed our support for the ongoing reform process and talked at length about the upcoming elections and what needs to be done to ensure that they are free and fair and open, transparent, inclusive. He also talked about the ongoing peace talks and the importance of an inclusive dialogue to achieve durable peace. And just as he did when he was in Indonesia, Tony Blinken had very timely, very urgent conversations about the humanitarian crisis at sea with the Rohingya and also Bangladesh migrants, many of whom are being trafficked, many of whom are in distress in small boats at sea. Now, I'll just take a moment to say that we are following closely and value greatly the work that Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand have done so far to provide assistance and to help in this situation, including taking in something on the order of 3,000 migrants in recent days, and importantly agreeing to take in many more as part of this humanitarian effort. It's a serious situation, and countries in the region simply need to act together. The goal is to save lives. The imperative is to save lives. We need to work collectively to meet the immediate humanitarian needs, and we also need to work longer term on the more fundamental challenges and find solutions to the root causes. This is an area where, of course, the United States is ready to help. No one country can or should be expected to handle this crisis on its own. It's a regional crisis that requires regional and international assistance, and we are working with and through international organizations such as the IOM and the UNHCR, as are the other governments involved. I just conclude by saying that when he was in Myanmar, Deputy Secretary Blinken had some very direct and very candid conversations about the root causes of the migration, including the need to improve the conditions facing the Rohingya population, and facing the people in Rakhine State, and certainly to allow full and unfettered access by international NGOs and other humanitarian groups to everyone who's in need. So as you can see, there's a very, very full plate. There's a lot going on. Why don't I stop here and open the floor to questions?
Wow. Okay. So let's start across the top here. Remember to say who you are and your outlet, please.
Thank you so much.
It's on.
On. Thank you. Hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Welcome back to DC. I believe you still have a jet lag, as I. Let me start with the.
Name and outlet.
Atsushi Okudera, Asahi Shimbun. Let me start with China's reclamation works in Spratly Island. As we all know, this is one of the major topics on the last trip. On China view, as you know, a new model of major power relations means respecting each other's core interest, and also they are asserting individual problem should not affect U.S.-China relations. So, which means my question is: do you think piling sands on the reef in South China Sea, constructing a land and claim their sovereignty is an individual issues? Do you believe this would not affect any impact on U.S.-China relations? And also, President Xi, Secretary Kerry raised a concern on this issue. What was President Xi's response, and are you satisfied with China's response and their ongoing action? Thanks so much.
Well, thanks for that question. All countries have interests. No country's interest justifies behavior that is inconsistent with international law or that destabilizes a region as important as the Asia-Pacific region. The South China Sea is a common interest, a collective interest to countries that trade and countries whose economies depend on trade. That means that there should be a collective effort to support a peaceful resolution of disputes. Now, as is well known, the United States doesn't claim any territory in the South China Sea, but we do claim the international rights of freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, freedom to conduct lawful commerce that belong to every sovereign nation. Those are rights that we will continue to exercise, and those are principles that we will defend. It's not only the big and strong countries like the United States that deserve to be able to conduct trade in the South China Sea area. It's every country. What this means is that all countries involved need to show restraint. All countries involved need to respect the rules and the norms. Now, the Secretary was afforded tremendous access in Beijing by the Chinese leadership. He had an extended and very substantive conversation with President Xi Jinping. The South China Sea, of course, featured in that conversation, and the Secretary made clear our concerns. In addition, the Secretary underscored that the tensions that are generated in the South China Sea by China's actions do have an impact on U.S.-China bilateral relations. That is something that I'm sure the Chinese leaders already knew by virtue of the kinds of questions that I got when I testified before the Senate on the issue of the South China Sea. But the Secretary's point was that there is a path forward that is respectful of everyone's interests. And it's a diplomatic path, the hallmark of which is restraint and respect for one's neighbors. It's a path that's based on good communication and on good diplomacy. Now, we have made the point again and again that all the sand in the world won't manufacture sovereignty. I'd say the problem isn't the sand, however, it's the behavior. That said, sand isn't the solution either. Diplomacy is. So instead of manufacturing outposts, which are frankly building mistrust, building uncertainty, building bad feelings among the countries concerned, and those bad feelings spill over into the relationship that China has with other countries, including the United States. We want to see the Chinese and the other claimants build common ground. And the way that you build common ground is not with a dredging boat. It's not with a bulldozer. It's at the bargaining table as the claimants, or as China and ASEAN, work out a code of conduct. I have to say that as a diplomat with considerable experience working with the Chinese to get things done, I know that they can be marvelously productive and efficient. And so I know of no reason why China and the ASEAN countries cannot successfully negotiate a code of conduct by the time they meet at leaders level in Kuala Lumpur in November of this year. And that is certainly something that I would like to see. So the bottom line that Secretary Kerry conveyed to the Chinese leadership is this. China is entitled to its claims, as are other claimants. But we ask that China, like other claimants, make those claims in a way that is consistent with international law. And we ask that China, along with other claimants, exercise restraint in its pursuit of those claims so that a diplomatic resolution is possible.
Right. Chin-Yi?
Thank you very much, Mr. Assistant Secretary. I'm Chin-Yi Chen with Shanghai Media Group. Regarding the Chinese Navy issued the warning to U.S. surveillance plane in the South China Sea, does the U.S. government worry about the possible of risk of confrontation? And also, when Secretary Kerry visited China, he specifically stressed the need of smart diplomacy in the region. So is sending a surveillance plane in South China Sea a smart diplomacy? Thank you.
Great. Thanks. The United States conducts overflight operations in international waters around the entire globe. So the flight of a reconnaissance plane in the South China Sea is a regular occurrence and, frankly, an entirely appropriate occurrence because that is international water, international airspace. We will continue to fully exercise our rights globally to the international space. And we will go, as we consistently do, further in seeking to preserve the ability of all countries to appropriately exercise their rights to freedom of navigation or freedom of overflight. Look, nobody in their right mind is going to try to stop the U.S. Navy from operating. That would not be a good bet. But it's not enough that a U.S. military plane can overfly international waters, even if there is a challenge or a hail and query from the PLA. We believe that every country and all civilian actors also should have unfettered access to international waters and international airspace. So, yes, the U.S. Navy will continue to sail the high seas. Yes, U.S. military aircraft will continue to patrol and to reconnoiter in international airspace. But we want a fisherman from Indonesia to be able to do the same thing. We want a pilot from Singapore or from Thailand to be able to do the same thing. That's what America is all about. We want these global principles and universal norms to apply not only to us because we're strong, but to every country. Now, the diplomacy here is the strong support of that principle. And it is a part of what we do, and it is a part of what we say. Our global operations are in service of these principles. They are not aimed at or intended to disadvantage another country. To the contrary, they defend the interests of every sovereign actor.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to move back in the back. Mikun? Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Shinpei Yoshioka from Japanese Public TV NHK. I want to ask Mr. Russell about Japan, US, and Russia's issue. Your colleague, Ms. Nuland, and your boss, Secretary Kerry, went to Russia and saw President Putin and their counterparts. That made Japan to think it's a kind of momentum to put forward the Japan and Russian relationship, for instance, of our foreign minister's visit to Russia or whatever. Do you think this is the right direction, or is there a kind of small misunderstanding? Thank you.
We briefed the Japanese government in full in advance of the meeting between Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov and President Putin in Sochi. So there was no surprise, and I certainly hope no misunderstanding. Secretary Kerry met with the Russians at a senior level for the express purpose of pushing for compliance with the Minsk agreement. Secretary Kerry did what a global diplomat should do, which is to tackle the problem at its source. he had in-depth and direct discussions with President Putin about the crisis in Ukraine and pushed for Russian adherence to its own commitments. This preceded his meeting with the NATO ministers in Antalya, Turkey. So his mission addressed an urgent and specific problem that requires direct engagement with the decision makers in Russia who have played a big role in creating the problem and have an important role in solving it. So pursuing a specific mission, as he did, is vastly different from business as usual. We are not operating on the basis of business as usual with Russia as long as they are out of compliance with their important commitments on a major national security issue. I do not believe that the Japanese government is under any misunderstanding about what Secretary Kerry did or what the U.S. policy is. And I also am confident that the Japanese government is similarly committed to the principle of not pursuing business as usual under the current circumstances.
Kang Dong Lee from KBS. You mentioned that there will be a summit next month between President Park and President Obama. Do you think they will discuss at the summit on the THAAD issue, the THAAD issue? It is the biggest issue in Korea right now. If they don't want to discuss this issue at the summit, and then what condition or time would be the best chance for starting of the formal discussion between two countries?
Well,
thank you.
Thanks. I'll begin with the disclaimer that a government official who predicts what his president will and will not do is taking a risk. But I'm going to take that risk anyway. I do not expect President Obama and President Park to discuss the issue of THAAD, ballistic missile defense, because typically those sorts of specific defense system questions need to be worked through the system before they get to the leaders' level for consultation or decision. We have not begun government-to-government consultations over the THAAD system. Secretary Kerry, I want to say yesterday, but it was a little bit longer than that, a few days ago in Seoul, when he met with soldiers from U.S. Forces Korea, U.S. soldiers, and he met with U.S. Diplomats, mentioned that the THAAD was one of the numerous issues relating to defending against the North Korean threat that we, Americans, were thinking about internally. I gather that was misinterpreted or misreported in the media as implying that there were some bilateral discussions, and I'm glad to set the record straight. He was very clear that he was simply talking about what we ourselves are considering. But I know that the two presidents will discuss the challenge posed by North Korea's missile program and the the recent ejection test from a submarine by North Korea was another blatant violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. I know this issue is being discussed in New York, and it is one of a series of provocative, threatening steps that North Korea has been taking that underscore the fact that North Korea is trying to scare us where it should be trying to negotiate with us. Be that as it may, the US-ROK alliance is very, very strong. Our commitment to the defense of South Korea is rock solid, and our capabilities are much stronger than they have ever been before. The continued development of ballistic missile technology in tandem with North Korea's ongoing nuclear program accounts for the fact that we have introduced various systems and significantly strengthened our defense so as to effectively mitigate that threat from North Korea.
Okay, great. Bingo?
Quick follow-up
Oh,
on that issue. Yeah.
are you okay with the follow-up? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to agree with SBS, the Seoul Broadcasting System from Korea. Just yesterday, the day before yesterday, Assistant Secretary Frank Rose referred to the THAAD issue. He said, we are considering permanently stationing THAAD unit on the Korean Peninsula. Is that his own idea, isolated idea, or a shared idea in the administration?
Well, as Secretary Kerry said, there's some consideration underway among and within the U.S. government as to what systems make sense, including the question of THAAD, but no decisions have been made.
Okay, bingo.
Thank you, Stephanie, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Secretary Russell, for hosting this briefing. I understand you mentioned the U.S. has a right to fly the surveillance aircraft in South China Sea, but for the first time, the United States invite the U.S. media to on board. What is the tension behind this? What is the intention behind this move, and do you think it's helpful? And also, we are seeing other tensions between United States and China, such as the DOJ just charged 6 Chinese nationals with economic espionage. Do you agree with some experts? They are worrying that the U.S.-China relations are at the tipping point, which the respective fears are near to outweighing the respective hopes. Do you share the concern? Thank you.
I do not believe that the U.S.-China relationship is at a tipping point. I think that the U.S.-China relationship has a very strong foundation and a very bright future. We're determined to realize the potential in the U.S.-China relationship and the heavy investment in diplomatic and political engagement we have made with Chinese leaders, as well as the expansion of our people-to-people connections and our business and trade connections, reflects that determination and those hopes. But there are real problems, and the key to achieving our positive agenda is being clear-eyed and clear-spoken in dealing with those problem areas. You asked what the motive was behind the occasional inclusion of media in a routine patrol or a standard mission regarding domain awareness? I'll answer you in one word: transparency. We want to share what we do, and we want to share what we see. And in a sensitive area like the South China Sea, we think it's important for all parties to have an accurate understanding of what is underway. No one wants to wake up one morning and discover there has been a unilateral alteration of the status quo. No one wants to wake up one morning and discover that China has built numerous outposts and, even worse, equipped them with military systems. Nobody wants to see that. And so having a clear understanding of what is underway creates the opportunity to have a clear conversation with the party concerned about the implications of that behavior, how neighbors and how the international community views those actions. The second part of your question pertained to the indictments announced against Chinese actors for cyber theft and for IPR, economic espionage. Those specific cases are entirely a law enforcement matter. As a diplomat, I don't get a special briefing. I don't get a vote on what the Department of Justice does. But there, too, I think you're seeing at work this same principle of transparency and commitment to rules. There are laws against reaching into another country, reaching into a company, and stealing its intellectual property. Those rules, when they are broken, need to be enforced, and transgressions need to be investigated. So the investigation is underway. The broader issue is this: as China emerges as a major and increasingly developed economy, its interest in sustaining and strengthening international rules should grow. I've been told by Chinese senior officials that they recognize that increasingly Chinese firms themselves have something to protect. That should be a strong motivator for fully enforcing the laws. And we hope that just as we enforce our laws against economic theft and IPR violation, China will do the same.
I think we have time for just one more. Yes, right over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Tatsuya Mizumoto from Jiji Press. I won't go back to South China Sea again. So what do you think about the unity of ASEAN? ASEAN is the one which you support to have code of conduct with China. Don't you think the unity is not powerful? And I think you recognize there's some frustration to Chinese activity in South China Sea, in the region, also in DC. So if you cannot stop that activity, what you're going to do? What is your next step? Thank you very much.
You will have seen over the last 6 years the tremendous amount of interest that the administration in Washington has shown in ASEAN, and the tremendous amount of engagement that we have had with ASEAN, including the designation of U.S. ambassador to ASEAN, along with the decision by President Obama to attend annual summits and in some cases visit more than once in a year. We take ASEAN very seriously. As I mentioned, I hosted the 10 ASEAN senior officials just a week ago here in Washington for more than a day of in-depth conversations. One of the reasons that we take ASEAN so seriously is that ASEAN's centrality is a stabilizing and unifying principle in the region. By engaging with ASEAN and at ASEAN-led meetings, major powers like the United States and Japan and Australia, and Korea, along with China, along with Russia, along with India, can engage and can interact on a constructive regional agenda. That's the beauty of the East Asia Summit, in my view. That's why in 2015, we collectively are working with ASEAN to strengthen the East Asia Summit as a mechanism and as an institution that lends great value to the region. Now, we believe, as does the bulk of the region, that this architecture, this grouping, is not only fully consistent with America's alliance systems, it is possible because of the stability that those alliances provide. But by making ASEAN at the centerpiece of regional architecture, I believe we avoid the kind of rivalry or tug-of-war between major powers like China and the United States that might otherwise occur. Now, ASEAN's greatest strength is not its ability to make quick decisions and implement them. It is a consensus-driven body made up of countries, many of whom place a great premium on respect for each other and maintaining a certain comfort level. That's the Southeast Asia cultural tradition, and we all need to respect it. But when it comes to an issue of existential importance, ASEAN has shown that it can come together. A case in point was the summit they held in Malaysia at the end of April, in which the leaders unequivocally expressed their concern about the massive reclamation work underway in the South China Sea. I think that all of the 10 ASEAN countries are determined and committed to try to find a way forward with China that lowers the risk of conflict, that lowers the risk of coercion, and that opens the door to the restoration of a healthy and constructive relationship. That's something that we are determined to assist.
Okay.
Can we have just one non-Korea,
What would you like, Vietnam?
something other than
Something from, yes, go ahead.
Hi, Diao Haiyang from China News Service. I have a question on SED.
Wow. What's your topic?
SED, the new run of that.
Well, that's what I think we were looking for some other part of the world.
Some other
Yes,
topic.
yeah, go over here.
Mr. Secretary, my name is Norman Fu. I'm a columnist of the China Times of Taiwan. As you know, the capstone of cross-strait relationship is the so-called 92 consensus. However, we got a problem now. The opposition party, the DPP in Taiwan, does not accept this so-called 92 consensus. And Chairwoman Tsai Ing-wen is coming to Washington at the beginning of next month. I presume you'll be seeing her. And she's already declared presidential candidate for the DPP party. And the expectation is she's going to win. And in anticipation of her victory, China's President Xi Jinping has recently warned in a speech that should the 92 consensus is negated, there could be a catastrophic earthquake. I wonder, in view of the U.S. influencing both sides, Taiwan and the mainland of China, could the U.S. exercise its influence to persuade Chairwoman Tsai Ing-wen to come to the reality of, even if not accepting, at least acknowledging the existence of the so-called 92 consensus. And also at the same time, when President Xi Jinping comes in September for a state visit, the U.S. give him assurances that this earthquake would not happen.
Great. Thank you. Where to begin? Let me begin with the bottom line. Taiwan is a thriving democracy. And I think that is one of the things that American people love the best about Taiwan. We certainly respect that democracy, and we respect the right of the voters on Taiwan to make their own choices. For that reason, we don't take sides, and we don't take actions that would imply that we are taking sides in any election. We respect the people of Taiwan, and we respect their ability to select their own leaders. In that same vein, we are happy, I am happy, to meet representatives of any of the major parties on Taiwan, as I would be willing to meet representatives from elsewhere in similar circumstances. Candidates often choose to come to the United States to consult at some appropriate moment in advance of an election, and that's fine with us. We would be happy to meet with Chairman Tsai. We welcome her visit and the opportunity to talk about a range of issues. We would be equally happy to meet with the candidate from the KMT, should he or she choose to visit Washington. So there's nothing political implied in the fact that Chairwoman Tsai might visit the United States and be received by those of us who handle foreign policy. And the reason we would want to talk to her is because the United States has an important, long-standing, unofficial relationship with Taiwan, because the United States has a huge and long-standing interest in peaceful and stable cross-strait relations. And because through our One China policy and based on the 3 communiques and the Taiwan Relationship Act, we have commitments to maintaining contact with all of Taiwan political circles and society. Now, as far as the cross-strait policy you reference, which is what I think the 92 consensus formula refers to, we have seen very significant progress over the last 6 or 7 years in cross-strait relations, and we have welcomed and we value the steps that each side have taken. to reduce tensions and to improve cross-strait relation on the basis of dignity and respect. The substance of where cross-strait relations go and the scope of the interactions between Taiwan and the mainland, those policy issues, number one, are for the people of Taiwan to decide what position they want to take. Number two, for the candidates themselves to explain to the voters. And we want to hear from the candidates, of course, what their policy is, what their strategy is. That, too, is not taking sides. It's a legitimate discussion about areas where the U.S. has interests, the U.S. has views, and given the friendly unofficial relations, the U.S. has an appropriate expectation that a major political candidate would want to talk through and share with us his or her thinking, his or her strategy for managing that important relationship. How they manage it, what they view as the desirable path forward is what we want to hear. Now, I would also say that even as we are discussing with the leaders of Taiwan's political parties our strong interests in cross-strait stability as friends, we're also talking to Beijing and encouraging the leadership in Beijing to exercise patience and to show flexibility and restraint in dealing with the leadership in Taiwan that we think is in the interests of both parties, in the interests of the region, and certainly in our interests. So we look forward to Chairwoman Tsai's visit and look forward to hearing what it is that she has to say.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.